Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. Did you miss me? I'm back, everybody.
I missed you.
Only a week this time, by the way. I act like this is like a big, oh my God, I've been gone for a week. I've like not published the podcast for months at a time in the past. So this is only a week. Everybody who thought that I wouldn't be back for 2 months, actually, it was just a week. I did have that, right, where I was planning to take just a week off when I had my hip surgery, and that dragged on for months. So it was kind of hard to get back on track with all that.
Yeah, well, you did have a major joint replaced, so
Yeah, and I thought that I was like, hey, I'd be able to sit down and record. That's easy enough. I have all this free time now. Yeah, sitting was pretty uncomfortable at that time for long periods of time. So, and this episode, by the way, we'll be discussing the fourth episode of Your Friends and Neighbors, an episode called "Little Literal Dragons." This, by the way, Sona, this show, I think, according to our downloads, is very popular. I assume Apple has a hit on their hands here. They are currently shooting season two, so they definitely know that they're onto something. Even before the show started airing, they knew it was going to be a hot commodity. And yeah, I mean, we had, I think, I announced here on a podcast that the finale of The White Lotus was our fastest downloading episode. We got to our milestones
great.
at record pace, and your friends and neighbors is right behind it. And as a matter of fact, we'll probably catch up to it and eclipse it within the next week or so. So if that's any indicator that, once again, if our podcast is any indicator at all, it could just be that shows are not, for example, your friends and neighbors is probably not getting as much podcasts out there. We're not competing as much as you have. But for example, the White Lotus, which had not only many shows covering it, and thank you everybody for listening to our coverage as well. But there's an official podcast from HBO,
Right.
right? So we're competing with a lot more competition, let's say. So, but regardless of any of that, this is the type of show that seems to be, from our downloads, going viral in a way that, for example, we've seen with earlier seasons of The White Lotus and with the first season of Severance, which of course all turned into phenomenons eventually. So I think that this is an indicator that this show is going to be very popular.
Well, I really love it so far, so I am fully invested. But first, how was your
Yes.
vacation?
Yes. So I went down south. I have not, well, I've been to Florida, so I guess I have been down south. And I've spent very short periods of time in Texas, like mostly on layovers, but in general have not spent significant amounts of time in the South. And we were down in Hilton Head in South Carolina. But before then, we went to Savannah, Georgia, which I loved, I have to say. And I highly recommend, Sona, that to go down there. First of all, in the US and Europe, it's very common. You walk around a city and this building is 700 years old. This building is 800 years old. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty normal to see that type of thing. But in the US, you really don't see that type of thing. Maybe one building, like in New York, this building is from the 1700s, but one building, like needle in a haystack sometimes. And you walk around Savannah, and it is the entire city is so old, and it's the original layout, the original neighborhoods from hundreds of years ago. So seeing such an old city is really beautiful. The architecture, you can see layers of history. Like, for example, at one point, having iron was an indicator of wealth. So you have these beautiful houses where everything on the outside is handmade iron and still remaining there for hundreds of years. And there's these layers of history. And we went on a tour and found it really fascinating. And for me, the most fascinating, insightful part of it was just like, it just wasn't the culture I expected. Even when you go on these tours, there obviously is references to the Civil War, there's references to the Revolutionary War, but the whole city is laid out over these 24 squares, and 22 of them still remain, and they're all neighborhoods. And there's this culture of allowing people to speak in the square. So you have people like, on one corner, there's a Trump protest going on. On the other corner, there's an evangelist with a speaker. On another corner, someone's performing musically. So it's just interesting to have this outdoor culture. We were there on Easter. So there was a whole park where kids were doing like Easter egg hunts. And you saw the families outside. So it's such an interesting mix of people very actively outdoors, but also on those tours, I found it really fascinating that they're telling you stories about the Civil War, but then there's ingrained in the culture, they're talking about how all the stone work that you see at the water's edge comes from the ballast inside of the ships that would come empty but full of rocks. So there's these rocks from all over the world, and they still remain to this day. Like all the waterfront and the first floor of all those buildings and those warehouses are all made out of these stones that are very distinctive. But they told us about how the slaves would take those stones and then carve them into bricks and would have to walk all the way across town to the black area of Savannah and made the first church, which we saw as part of this trip, and all handmade from these stones. And I found it I found it fascinating that maybe not the traditional stereotype we have in the North, for example, that there is a real complex understanding of the history down there that people seem to have. It's just more complex, I think, than we oftentimes will think about it here in the North. And I thought that was really interesting that there is like a real wrestling with their own history. And I also surprised that maybe because there's a lot of schools down there, it was a very young population. It was a very integrated population. I really highly recommend it. It was a lot of fun and eye-opening as well. And
Good to
just such an
know.
incredibly beautiful city. Like just, you've probably seen the Spanish moss and that look of, you can imagine that you were stepping hundreds of years into the past. Beautiful down there and very walkable. Like, I mean, you can see the whole city in a day because pretty, very much like if you've ever been to Charlotte,
Hmm.
another walkable and old city as well.
So happy to hear you guys had a great time.
Yeah. And then Hilton Head was just hanging out in a resort, which was the opposite of the cultural, Savannah trip, but still a lot of fun and very relaxing, except for the traveling, which is a nightmare as usual.
It just gets worse and worse,
It
doesn't it?
really does get worse and worse. I did not realize we had a layover on the way back. My wife didn't tell us until the day before. It's like, by the way, there's
Ah,
a layover on our flight back. And they delayed one flight and then the other flight. We barely made the other flight. Then
stressful.
we barely made it and then delayed it by 2 hours. And then we were like, okay, well, let's go get something at the restaurant. And then they're like, we're boarding right now. Like, oh no. And then, of course, we
Worst.
run back to the gate after trying to pay our bill really quickly. And then we waited at the gate for like another hour and change. I'm like, why did we run back? What's the point? So,
So
anyway.
frustrating.
And I told her, never get layover flights.
I agree. I will never, ever book anything but a nonstop.
When I used to travel for work all the time, that became my rule. Maybe I used to book my own trips. So maybe the second or third time, like trying to save some money and I had some kind of nightmare scenario on a layover. And I'm like, direct flights only.
Yep,
That's it. Direct flights only,
absolutely.
period. And
100% agree.
yeah, that makes traveling so much better, to be honest. All right, let's get into this episode of the show. This is the fourth episode, like you mentioned. Next week, we'll be halfway through the season. You
Wow.
already prefaced this by saying that you've been enjoying the show so far. I also have been enjoying the show. I like that they closed some of the plot holes we had earlier
Mhm.
in
Yeah,
quite a few of them actually in this episode. It almost feels like maybe someone saw the first couple episodes and was like, maybe we
that's
need to
right.
put
Let's
some
troubleshoot. Yes.
exactly. The writers' room is like, I think you missed a few things here. And which you could have inserted into the earlier episodes, to be honest. Just a couple of cutaway
I
shots
agree with you.
could have fixed all of this, but I guess they didn't get around to it until they started editing episode 4. And honestly, some of this, like the conversation in the car that closes some of these loops, it really seems like it was, we need to shoot a scene and put this in the episode. So, but it does do that, which I liked. I maybe we save this for the end, but at the same time, I feel like maybe the show's turning into a different show than I expected earlier on, and I'm curious to
Totally
see
agree.
if you're if that's the show you want to watch.
Yes, I love it.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Maybe that's not the show I was expecting, but let's have that conversation when we get to
Totally the same, but I love it. I'm so happy about it.
All right. First of all, this episode starts off interestingly. There's been some critique of the show that it doesn't have like a point of view. There's an expectation that what's the point of view on this, which I have to say, I do not think is a bug. I think this is like an asset to the show, that it is interesting to me to have a show where it has a schizophrenic relationship to loving the wealth that it possibly is critiquing, and I've heard that is a limitation of the show. And I kind of disagree. I think that we culturally are torn between these two things. So I thought that tension was interesting. But I thought the show maybe was going in a direction of trying to put its thumb on a scale, of opening up on the maid, Elena's, Nick's maid, Elena's home life. And you see that she lives in a house with, is this her family or are these other maids she lives with? Did you get a feel for that in these opening moments?
I think it's her family. I think just to go back to what you said about having a point of view, maybe I'm not well versed enough in media critique, but to me, it does have a point of view. And the conflict between enjoying all of that wealth and understanding all of the negative energy around it is a point of view.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that a lot of the arguments I've seen among critical class, and despite all of the overstatement of this, I do believe that in general, people in the media and definitely critics do have a liberal bent. And when they're saying the show doesn't have a point of view, I think what they're saying is it's not the point of view that they want the show to have.
Yeah, I don't
But
get that.
yeah,
Um,
and I agree with that. I think that the tension between the
yeah.
I hate this, but I want it is what is interesting. And by the way, it is what is in our culture. So,
Yeah. And I think to return to what you actually asked me about Elena, I do think that opening was heavy handed, but I do think this show is heavy handed
yes, exactly.
generally. So
It's
I
not
think it's
subtle.
in keeping with everything else that's going on. And I also think, as someone who lives in the city, and I'm not of this stratosphere of wealth, but as someone who understands people having nannies, at least, right? And I think I've talked before about like the nanny subculture that
Yeah,
exists in Manhattan. I don't think it was all that far off
right.
of what is reality.
Yeah, I wanted to shout you out for that because I had speculated, well, maybe it's someone who's been tailing him. I didn't even see, honestly, with the maid as being the possible person there in the final moments of last episode, and you immediately called it out. And then I said, "Oh, that could be interesting because then she could be, she has knows the ins and outs of these houses." And you brought up the fact that yeah, like the nannies have this kind of
Hmm.
inside culture, like an internal WhatsApp group of, like, so to speak,
I
of
think it might be a literal WhatsApp group.
yes, in this case, a literal
Yeah.
WhatsApp loop, or a poker game as well that they played together, or something like that, where they all gossip. And you were 100% correct. All right, this is this whisper network of connections amongst all the people who work, which I do think is interesting because, like you mentioned, it probably is legitimately true. It also is something that is almost like a narrative device in so many shows. When you think about, I hadn't even thought about the show in this context until now, but you think about all those British upstairs, downstairs type TV shows and series, even Downton Abbey, which has this element where people on in that show are having these conversations, telling secrets that no one is supposed to know when the maid is, or their dresser or whoever is in the room with them. And of course, so now everybody knows this information, but these people become like invisible.
Hmm.
And
Right.
and of course that is obviously something that is being addressed here as well, that these people are in their homes living with them, raising their kids in particular, in one of the references to one of the characters here in this particular episode of TV, and forgotten in a lot of ways. They become like background, but they are
Yeah, they're
and
like a
that,
piece of furniture. Nobody hides anything from them because they're
exactly.
so a part of their everyday background, but they are absorbing all of it.
And maybe there's a little critique here in all of those similar shows, and of course here as well, that you forget these people, neglect them to your own risk, because they are there and they know your secrets more than you do, probably.
Hmm.
Speaking of the whole idea, if this show does go more in the direction of blackmailing, which maybe has to happen considering how the investigation has escalated so quickly in this
Hmm.
particular show, that these people all know these secrets, right?
For sure.
So, of course, it turns out that it is Elena. What did you think about this interesting? And I think, to your point, that the show does have a point of view, that I think it illustrates it pretty elegantly in this opening sequence. She's in this crowded house. She's quickly getting ready for work in the bathroom. She is rushing to get into on the bus. She's taking this long bus ride to Nick's house, arriving with other maids at around the same time. And then she goes and cleans this opulent house, which is pretty much a vacant. And then she has access to, like, she's soaking in the tub, and so it's like she suddenly is living in this opulence. So I think it is that duality visualized in that opening sequence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved the humor of her cleaning around that toilet and it driving her crazy to the point that she finally unplugs it in frustration.
Yes, she's a little frightened by it a few times, actually.
As someone who has a home that is like completely given over to Google devices, our cleaning lady who only comes once every few weeks when she has time between her other jobs. It's not nearly the situation you see on this show, but I know our Google situation has frustrated her. So it made me laugh because there are times she's like, I can't get the lights to turn on. I can't get them to turn off. I can't get this thing to stop talking to me. So I found it very funny.
And as we mentioned, this of course introduces this whole new aspect to the show, that Elena now becomes this, cooperates with him.
Well, I mean, I think they've made such a great character here, right?
Yeah.
Like, she is, first of all, beautiful, also very charismatic.
Mhm.
She has a sense of humor, you know, all of it. It's very fun to watch. And I think she's got a great chemistry with John Hamm.
Yeah.
So I think so much of my enjoyment of this show probably lies in the casting. I think they've really done a great job with so much of the casting here.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have not heard this specifically about John Hamm, but it probably is true. There's this reputation that Colin Farrell has, for example, where they'll say, "Oh, he has such great chemistry with this person, with that person," and everybody's just like, "He has great chemistry with everybody." Like, it's just like he's just one of those people. And it's possible that John Hamm is one of those actors that just
Maybe,
has good chemistry with everybody as
maybe.
well. But I do agree that so far that the casting in general and in all these interactions are so natural, right? Even when the way he hangs out with Barney, is that his name? I keep forgetting his name. If it's Bernie or Barney.
Yeah, I'm not sure myself, but I do love it. It could come across as heavy-handed, but I think it's done in a way that sells it here. How, everything she has assessed about him is exactly on the nose.
Yes.
Like, why were you stealing the ring? Because it's so valuable. Is it because it's so valuable, or is it because you wanted to take the thing that would hurt him the most?
Right.
Because as you pointed out last time, it's crazy to think he's not going to notice that that ring is gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious at this point to me, and this shows his lack of introspection, and maybe also speaks to I had diagnosed him as being manic or something, because I don't think he's really thinking through his actions to that exact point where he's saying, "I'm going to steal this ring. It's going to be worth a lot of money." You probably cannot sell that ring for that much money if you just think about it for 1 second. If you steal something that goes back directly to one individual
So
person,
traceable.
just
Yes.
like the watch. And I'm sure he didn't
More
think about
so
that.
than the watch, even.
Yeah, even more so than the watch. Exactly. It's not one of a very select few. It is one of one. And yeah, so to that exact point. And then what's the resale market for it? You can imagine with a watch, someone's going to falsify the documentation, and you could resell it in some way, even though it has this direct lineage potentially. But with the ring, you have to be selling it to someone who is a thief, right? Because they have to be like, I know if I ever get caught with this, I'll be identified as a criminal. So that is a very limited pool of people you could probably sell that to. But that's not why he's selling it, right? That's not why he's stealing it. It's also
Right.
not the reason that you steal a $40,000 bottle of wine and put it in front of the person you stole it from, right?
Right.
He is intentionally being self-destructive, and in a way, she is taking, showing him that there is a way to turn this into a business. And we see this montage in this very episode, right? Of him just churning through stuff, showing up at Lou's shop.
Yes.
And like, now these are probably smaller gets. These aren't like 60,000 at a time, but hey, if it's $10,000 4 or 5 times a week, at the end of the month, that's a lot more money.
Yes. And I love going back to the dynamic between them. I love that conversation where they're talking about how she probably knew about the affair before him because
Hmm.
she also walked in on them.
Exactly.
And I love how this character, Coop, is very honest with her right away.
Yep.
Very open about these things that show his vulnerabilities and that really devastated him. He's not being guarded with her and acting like this isn't painful. So I wanted to mention that. And I also wanted to mention, getting back to something you said, I feel like we're seeing shades of Breaking Bad here,
Oh yeah.
right? Where it's like at first it seems like, well, I needed to do it because how else was I going to make ends meet?
Right.
And then it becomes like the thrill of it and the
Right.
high you're getting off
Yeah.
of it. And you like being the person who's doing these bad things.
And then, yeah, I think when you think about the ring, which she gets pulled back from, I think there's an escalation you see very quickly where
Very quickly.
he starts wanting to be like, it's not only that, like you said, at first, he overtly says that in his narration, right? And there's less narration in this episode, by the way. So maybe another thing that is showing a little more confidence in the way the show is being written. We don't need as much narration to get his interiority now. But to your point, he says, I liked it, right? So then there's the thrill, like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. But then beyond that, it starts getting to be the point where it's not only vengeance, it's also like, how far can I go? And I feel like he needed to be reined in. But it's also interesting, by the way, and once again, I think this is not a bug, but possibly a feature of the show. When he's caught and he hears that gun cock, it's not like a Walter White situation where he's always afraid of being discovered. He turns around pretty casually, as if he's like, well, it's going to happen eventually, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
seems somewhat resigned to
End of the
his,
line.
yeah,
Yeah.
he kind of feels somewhat resigned to whatever is going to happen to him, which maybe speaks to, once again, that he is in some kind of depressive mode or something, whether he will acknowledge it to himself or not. What's that thing that men will do anything to not go to therapy? This is this is his version of that.
Funny.
So what did a couple of things. Did you in that montage, what did you pick up anything additionally you can see from the this whisper network of maids when you see them commiserating outside of work, and also intercut with that the same thing where you see him dropping things off the at the pawn shop. Did you get? I didn't track this. I probably should have rewatched a little more carefully. What type of things is he turning in? Did you catch any of that?
Well, I think it was mostly jewelry, it seemed
Yeah.
like. They definitely discussed the one bracelet.
Right.
And I think there was also a reference to a Cartier necklace,
Right.
or at least we saw him, I think, with a diamond necklace. Gosh, is this a figment of my imagination? I feel like we saw him with a diamond necklace. So I feel like it was largely jewelry. And I will say, as someone who has a lot of jewelry, not necessarily at this level by far, but it would be very hard to track that a certain piece was missing unless it had enormous sentimental value.
Right. That's an interesting point. The whole idea of the jewelry. I love that the first target she comes up with is this is like jewelry that has a negative connotation
Yes,
to it that you
fight
can't.
jewelry.
Right. And so it's just like, yeah, get rid of that. And if they never see it again, they'll be happy to never see it again. They grudgingly continue to hold this thing. That's the type of thing that whether you're rich or not, you probably have these artifacts, like something you inherited from a relative that you're like, I guess we have to keep this around the house, even if you don't want to. I think everybody has those things. These people, those items just may cost tens of thousands of dollars in this particular case.
Yes. And you would kind of feel like, how big a deal can I make of this missing item from my
Right.
ex that, I really shouldn't be attached to? So,
That's an interesting point. It cuts both ways. What if you're hanging on to some piece of jewelry from a previous marriage or something, and then it disappears? And are you going to really go complain to your husband that you want
exactly. How
you
awkward. He's already
exactly
mad you kept it.
exactly? He's happy it's gone too. So just what?
Make a claim on your homeowner's insurance and move forward with your life.
I like this, and this is a little bit of where I'm wary of the direction the show is going in. And maybe it simply is the way it's written, that they've kind of created this character and packed in a biography and put in elements to the plot that I feel are going to have big dividends. In other words, I'm just bumping against bringing in this character and doing so much in such a short period of time. We meet her family. I mean,
It's a lot.
her cousin now is giving them codes to the security system. Another convenient thing that actually I mentioned this to my wife just a few minutes ago. She said, couldn't they have just had Lou be that person? Like maybe Lou knows a security guy in town, and she starts coaching him. I mean, we barely got to know that character, and now we have this other one. And because it just seems like they're putting a lot on this one relationship with Elena. And of course, this is like the grenade that's eventually going to go off. There's the screw up younger brother who's always getting in trouble. You know,
Yeah.
that's going to pay dividends later, and potentially in a negative way. And I think about the opening scene with someone shot at the bottom of those stairs. And is it somebody that, is the younger brother? Now, originally, I think maybe it could be the ex-husband, Sam's ex-husband. Now I'm thinking, well, is it like the younger brother who gets onto this whole situation? Now he wants a little piece of the action, and then things get out of hand. Regardless, it's like, oh man, like, they're doing a lot of stuff here. They're introducing a lot of stuff here that's going to pay dividends later. And it felt a little clunky to me, to be honest.
I wouldn't say it felt clunky, but it did for me, but it did feel forced,
Yes,
like
force. Mhm.
all the exposition is going to come about this woman in this one episode.
Yeah, in like 10 minutes, in a
And
10-minute period of time. Yeah.
she's afraid of being deported. The brother's getting into
Mm-hmm.
trouble.
Yes.
All of it is packed in there. So I guess so that they didn't have to worry about sprinkling it in later episodes. But
Yeah.
yes, I feel like we now know all there is that we will need to know
Yes.
about her for the rest of this season.
Yeah, that was my general concern with this episode. Is I feel like the show is changing gears, and it was very rough changing gears for me. And on the one hand, I felt like I worry that the show is going to be bumpy like this the rest of the season. But the most generous read is exactly what you just said. I was like, the show is changing gears. They're going to shove it all in here right now. We're changing gears, everybody.
Right.
Here's all the information you need. Like you said, we're setting up all the dominoes now. Okay, now we could go back, and the show could be, more less plot driven, or plot heavy, let's say.
Yeah, I will say about this show, as much as I love it, and I do think at this point I love it, it does feel like the construction of it is not invisible. It kind of
Yes.
shows, right?
Oh,
That
yeah.
like where they're stitching together plots, and kind of like last episode, I said, I think they've only showed us this woman who still works at the company because we're going to need to know later. We shouldn't forget about her,
Yep.
right? Like I think the stitches show kind
Yes.
of, but I don't mind it, but it is noticeable.
Yeah, there are versions of the show, like for example, Breaking Bad, which of course is utterly genius, so we can't compare everything to Breaking Bad or The Sopranos.
Right.
The Sopranos, by the way, is a very bumpy show. Although this is maybe closer to The Sopranos than it is to Breaking Bad. Where Breaking Bad, it almost seemed like, and I think they wrote it this way: they would put themselves into a corner and then try to write their way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was written that way, it really felt like, oh my god, like they would it's as if they were discovering things they had planted seeds in inadvertently weeks earlier. And it was a surprise to them as they were writing it. So when you're viewing it, you're like, oh, wow, that's a genius way to resolve this problem, right? So it felt that way more, as opposed to The Sopranos, where I felt like The Sopranos is, now that I'm saying this, is a better correlation to this. Because what I liked about The Sopranos and what I like about this show is the just hanging out with the family, and then these other things intercede. And then sometimes, like The Sopranos, when they were trying to set up the season finale, they would just kind of like shoehorn a bad guy into the middle of the season. And you're like, oh, well, that's going to pay off in 5 episodes, right?
Right.
And that very much feels like this is a show where, for me, I love to just see him like hang out with his sister or hang out with Sam, and then like trying to negotiate this, what is this relationship, and the dynamics, the similarity that these characters find in this in being in very different stages of their life. For example, to go back to the plot of the show, when you see that he sees that Elena and him are, uh, in a way, two sides of the same coin, because she is also working. She's the smart one. She's the one who's hustling. She's the one who has a plan, and she's the one who's supporting her family and trying to get her. You mentioned how she's illegal. She's trying to get her parents to come to the United States. And then it's not only getting them there, but then, as she says, now I have to support them when they get here. Like, how do I do that? Now all my costs just scale upwards. And he looks at her and goes like, in a very surprising way, those are the same problems I'm dealing with right now as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or have dealt with throughout my whole entire life. Being the one who's the stable one with her, his sister is, the problem child, and the supporting this family and trying to pretend like I got this all under control, even though you don't. So finding these surprising parallels between these people, and the way like Sam and what's his wife's name here again? His ex-wife, I mean. Mel.
I can never recall it.
Mel. So that way that Sam and Mel found that surprising camaraderie last week. That's where I love the show. I love all that stuff about the show. And then like the plot is trying to get going, and they kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's not like they slide that into the character stuff. They just kind of shove it in there, right? And I bump against it a little bit. But overall, like you said, like all the seams are showing, I'm still enjoying the show. So
Same. Yes.
oh, and of course, one more thing before we move on to some of the other characters, with Elena again, which is going to obviously be incredibly important to him, or as the show progresses. I already touched on it, but they did close some of these gaps. He has a scrambler for
Mm-hmm.
the cameras, which is such a tiny detail, and it explains a lot, right? Like he's avoiding the if they have a home security system, he avoids those homes. The cameras, which are these cheap, which is absolutely true, these cheap Ring cameras. If you get close enough, you could easily scramble them. So if he did actually scout out where the cameras were, he could just kind of point the scrambler at it and walk underneath it. And we see it briefly here, right? That he just scrambles the
Mm-hmm.
camera, walks on the, and even if you're watching the camera, it's like 2 seconds of fuzz on the screen.
Right,
No,
right,
no one's
right.
really paying attention to that. So if he is doing his homework and he does have a scrambler, this makes a lot more sense than what we were, bumping up against the earlier episodes. Just him wandering through people's backyards
Yes.
and just knocking on windows and being like, "Hello, can I take this watch?" Sure, no problem. Although the watch, well, no, the watch thing, I take that back. I was going to say he found the watch. He found a roll of cash during a party, which is great, by the way. Easy time to steal stuff from your friends' homes during parties. But then he comes back for the watch, which should have been a much more red flags on that one.
Well, and I also loved about his conversation with Elena that she points out that the housekeeper got blamed for the missing watch,
Yes, absolutely.
because that is absolutely the first thing that will happen. I see in my Facebook mom groups, all the time people saying this valuable thing has gone missing and I really don't want to blame my cleaning lady or my nanny, but
Yeah.
that's the only person that I can think of that would have had access to it and could have taken it.
Yeah, I worked with, this is years ago, I worked at a place, and I remember a story of this woman had a bad relationship with her daughter, and the daughter's boyfriend lived in the house with them in between, and they fired someone who worked at the house, saying that they had stolen something from the house. And then I was immediately thinking it's the boyfriend.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
then, a few weeks later, she's in a huge fight with her daughter, and I find out, like overhearing conversation, that they found out that the boyfriend stole the but I mean, they had pressed charges and everything against the other woman. And as far as I know, not in that conversation whether they dropped the charges or anything, because I don't know if you want to admit your mistakes after the fact. Unfortunately, that
Right.
oftentimes is what happens.
Yeah, I love that. And I loved the little back and forth about, like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to your friend. You can
Yeah.
see it
Yeah.
flash across his face that there are other consequences
Right.
of what he's doing. And then her quick shrug of, I never liked her anyway.
Right. I did feel like that was the show letting him off the hook a little bit there, so that we
Yeah,
wouldn't dislike him too
fair.
much. That's another thing that I felt was a little bit, I didn't really like. You raise it, you let him. It's like they're afraid of making us dislike him.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I do feel like the creator of this show has said that this is very much a Breaking Bad type show, and that season 2, he's already said, is going to be much darker than season 1.
Interesting.
So, which I'm curious for. I'm there for that, to be honest. As long as it doesn't lose some of the satire, I still want to see some of the satire and some of the comedy.
It's a very funny show.
Yeah, which, by the way, Breaking Bad was able to balance that, right? There was a lot of comedy, even as the show got extremely dark. So I
True.
do hope that they can balance those things out.
Here I thought I came up with that Breaking Bad analogy all in my own head, but maybe I absorbed it somewhere else.
No, you may have made the observation yourself anyway, but I also feel like even
No,
if the
it's very
creator,
obvious. It's not a brilliant stroke of insight by any means.
oh no, what I was going to say is that even if the showrunner himself was not aware that he was influenced by Breaking Bad, I think we're at a point now where it's absolutely impossible to have not been. If you see someone break bad in a show, it's pretty much, which by the way has happened before Breaking Bad, but now it is the codex for everybody else afterwards. Let's talk about Mel for a minute. So she has a rough week, right? But I do want to mention early in the episode, we see her at the supermarket and she runs into Coop's parents.
Oh my gosh.
You're like, you never want to see Coop's parents again. What did you think about seeing them again so soon?
Oh, this was so awful to watch and uncomfortable. And I did think it made her character likable the way she dealt with it.
Yes, yeah.
Because I think a lot of people would just grit their teeth through it and put on a fake smile. And she kind of was trying to do that, but the mom was just so offensive that she couldn't. So I liked how honest she was in their interaction about what she was feeling.
Yeah, it's very funny that she tries to. Of course, she's known this woman for a long time, so she tries to smooth it over as long as she can. But she's this woman, the mom, Coop's mom, is just not the type of person who can possibly let it go.
Right.
So she just
And we all know people like that.
Oh, yes, we do. We definitely do. Another thing, the show, there's a few. I mean, I have a lot of critiques about this particular episode. Once again, this is the episode I've disliked the most of the show because
Really?
yeah, I did, because of a lot of things I bumped up against, and it's. We touched on some of them already. It's the over explaining Elena's backstory. It was the letting him up a little bit off the hook, and I forgot to bring up the fact that he is feeling that guilt about the maid being fired. He brings it up again during the golf game that we see later.
That golf scene was great, I thought.
That was a really good scene. And you see how like all of these pettiness of these men, but also that he brings up the fact that why did you fire her? Are you sure that she stole your watch? And he says, well, once again, an interesting way that they digress from that. He says that he didn't really like her. Same, I guess she's an unlikable person, but apparently he had practically raised the kids. So she's been around for a long time. And he also feels like, I just thought we needed some new blood. So in a way, it's like he's using it as an excuse to get rid of her. All of that was pretty interesting. What else did you like about this, the golf scene in general?
I liked how Coop was trying to suss out how people are thinking about the theft of this watch. And I liked that they showed he was still a good golfer, even while he was trying to do all of that. It didn't affect his golf game one bit, which I think gives us some insight into his character, that he wasn't flustered at all about all of this as he's trying to feel people out. He's not worried they're going to somehow be onto something. Like, that's not occurred to him, that they could ever think it's weird that he's obsessed with this watch and why does he keep asking questions. And just that he was able to stay like calm, cool, and collected. I liked it.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. One is, and John Hamm, I think, was an athlete as well, for real. And I do think it speaks to him being an athlete, right? That he, there's this muscle memory, right? Whether he's playing tennis or whether he's playing golf, that there's a certain degree of confidence he has, or maybe just flow that he has when he is being athletic. But I do think also directly to that, he is a little cold in being able to pull this off, and in his interactions with people, and in not being emotionally available to these people, which all of this is good for him to be a criminal. I think it's part of his character, but maybe it is also what led to the demise of his marriage to an extent, right? So I do think that they are making that it's not just accidental. I think this is intentionally part of his character.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I've said all along, I'm giving Coop a wider berth than you are. But I think the perspective on the marriage changes quite a
Oh,
bit by
yes.
the end of this episode.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I agree with that. Okay, we have much more to say about Mel. But before we do,
So much.
so much more. Yes, absolutely. But before we get to all of that, a few other characters, because this is a very plot heavy and character development heavy episode once again. Barney, right? So Barney is worried about
Hmm.
Coop after getting a bag full of cash from him. Once again,
Also, something that we noted last week, right? So happy to hear that came up again.
yes, exactly. And once again, speaking to what's going on with Coop and how he is not 100%, that there's something going on with him. You think about the fact that, sure, he did show up with a bag of cash and hand it to him in a bag, but he could have written him a check. He just had to deposit the cash, right? So there are ways that he could have,
Hmm.
made this less suspicious. So he is the once again speaking to the fact that he's intentionally, to some extent, being self-destructive, maybe even, and that is definitely part of his character here as well. But Barney's worried about it. Barney, of course, has money problems of his own, and we're starting to see a parallel here too. That he is maybe financially stretched out and is not sharing this with his wife, and he even tries to put the brakes on her spending. But then when she goes, "Oh wait, are we not okay?" and he immediately backs off and he's like, "No, no, everything's fine, everything's fine," which again is a parallel to what happened to Coop. Do you think that this maybe, and I do not want to see this happen, by the way, do you think that Barney now becomes eventually part of this cabal of of these, another co-conspirator possibly? Do you think that, do you see that happening?
That hadn't occurred to me, but they do seem to be going out of their way to talk about how much money this
Yes.
renovation is costing and how he really doesn't have that much money at this point.
This show's interesting because it's like these women are putting these men through the ringer. Oftentimes it feels like a little misogynistic in that way. And yet I feel like the guys on this show, outside of Coop, obviously, and Barney possibly, but outside of Coop's primarily, the guys are just like the guys she's playing with the golf course and like the boss who fired him. They're the ones who are really putting, are almost caricatures. And the women are like these aspects of like the path not taken for Coop. Like Allie was the musician. She pursued her dream and it didn't really come the way she wanted to. And she regrets the fact that, she didn't perhaps get married and have the life that all these other people around her have. And she struggles to accept the fact that she has some minor success in getting this job, performing every week. So that's a possible route he could have gone in, right? And then you have Mel, who's unhappy with her marriage and cheated on her husband, and then that's another possible direction he could have gone in, right? And of course you have, like, let's say Sam as well, where Sam is the bitter person, and unlike him, who he's just like, I'm okay and I'm showing up at the parties and pretending everything's fine between me and my ex-wife, even if it really isn't. Sam is like going scorched earth and is feeling all the feels and hates her ex. And we see them have an ugly confrontation this very episode. So it's almost like the women become these surrogates for the path not taken for him. But then at the same time, you look about Barney's wife, and she's like just burning through his cash, even though he doesn't have it, which is maybe another thing that aligns him with Coop.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more.
Speaking of relationships with women and what they might mean as other alternate paths for Coop, what did you think about the whole situation where the lawyer Masiello, who Coop, I guess, didn't give that $250,000 retainer to, ends up showing up at
Hmm. Hmm.
his old What is he, a hedge fund manager? What did he used to do? He was a hedge
Yeah,
fund.
he makes it clear every time someone says, I heard you're not at the bank anymore. He
Yeah.
says hedge fund.
Hedge fund. Yeah. So now we explicitly know what that was. But yeah, so he's back at the hedge fund talking to his former boss, and it seems like they're chumming around. And of course, yet another thing where they keep the plot drip going.
Right.
Olivia is, of course, seeing this happen. And not only is she, they're keeping her in the fold as potentially a witness against him. They give her a promotion, basically just giving her a better office position. So she knows she's getting played. And she does decide to warn Coop that Maciello, this lawyer, is in Jack's pocket, is in his former boss's pocket. So, what do you think her loyalty to him is? And what do you think about this whole situation where they keep this romance alive? And of course, we have his current paramour, Sam, is even there to inadvertently witness this thing happen.
I feel like all of this is in service of some plot that is
Yes.
going to develop. I don't think there is a continued romantic aspect to their relationship, although I could be wrong. I feel like, at least from his side, he feels like his plate is full and he's not,
Yes.
he never really wanted to have an ongoing thing with such a big age gap. That's made quite clear in the first episode. So whenever I see her, I think it is in service of some bigger plot that will be developing over the course of the season and maybe next season from, what we're talking about, that it's already been renewed. They're already filming it. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I'm confused, to be honest. Another thing that I was a little confused with in this episode is and maybe these are things that they can, develop over the course of multiple seasons, and maybe that's the intention. But I think about it honestly feels like either there is the intention of having additional romantic entanglements, or at least open those doors open. And at the end of this episode, I'm like, okay, so he has unresolved stuff with his wife. It becomes pretty clear that his wife is still in love with him, or at least worries that she's made the wrong decision. He currently has a relationship with Sam, and she wants to be more than that. We have him meet with Olivia, and they kiss, and Sam even says that seemed like more than just a polite kiss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they obviously want to keep Olivia at least open to be a possible romantic interest in him, making Elena this very attractive and
Mm-hmm.
very
Mm-hmm.
compatible personality wise
Mm-hmm.
character with him. Again, makes her potentially. I mean, I watched those scenes of them together, and we speak about their chemistry with each other, and I could totally imagine that becoming
Absolutely.
romantic as well. And I mean, what woman in here other than Allie, maybe even Lou, is a potentially romantic partner?
It's
We have
like
to,
Homeland, where everybody was in love with Carrie,
that's
right?
right. She had to sleep with everybody by the end of the show. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what it is, right? If the show runs for 5 years, he'll eventually sleep with all these women.
I will say, and I just said it a few minutes ago. The thing with Olivia, the former colleague,
Mhm.
I feel like she still has the romantic feelings for him. I don't think he has the feelings for her.
Yeah.
So I don't see it quite in the same tier, but I definitely understand your analysis.
And maybe I guess that's
And you know
actually
what? Maybe that is the effect John Hamm has on everyone wherever he goes.
it
So,
could be exactly. Well, what was the joke? Let's circle back to that, because they, at least the show, I hate when shows don't acknowledge that people are really good looking. And I did like the fact when he shows up at the barbecue with the family,
yes,
and she goes, "You brought your Tinder dates to
yes,
to our barbecue?"
yes.
Like, no, he's just a friend. They're like, really? Oh, and I did like the fact you brought up Liv. Maybe she's the one who has romantic feelings for him, because that would close a little bit of that gap there. In First of all, does he need to have all these potential romantic partners
Right.
all at the same time? Like, you could just have it in the, on the back burner if you want to bring it back up again, but you are really just keeping them all those would like those opportunities available to him in every episode. It's like, okay, chill.
It
But
might also be a way of explaining why she's going out of her
yes,
way to
yeah,
try
mhm,
and keep him apprised of whatever's going on,
yes,
because she does have that little bit of extra interest in him
yep,
instead of thinking, well, as ugly as that got, it's by the wayside and onward and upward, and
right.
actually just finding a new job so she doesn't have to deal with this baggage.
Exactly. No, I mean that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that you touched on that earlier in what you just mentioned there. I completely agree that I think that that does, the fact that she is, feels this emotional connection to him
Right.
and maybe wants to rekindle things at some point in the future, that keeps her vested in protecting him to some
Yes.
extent. Yeah, I think that that is absolutely how they're trying to use that dynamic.
Right. Because otherwise, we'd be sitting here saying, why doesn't she just move on with her life and find a new
Exactly.
job? Why do they
Exactly.
keep talking to each other?
Right, exactly. Because she really feels like she's morally compromised by this. I'm like, she works at a
Yeah.
hedge fund. How morally?
Right.
What kind of morals could she possibly have? I just lost all the hedge fund
Yeah,
managers.
I was about to say.
Okay, so let's finally get over to Mel. Of course, she had the moths eating through her clothes last week, and there's
And you
rot
see
inside those
they're,
walls.
yeah, you see they're working on it this week.
Yeah, exactly. And she's working on it too. But what did you think about this? I thought this was once again, this is what I like about the show is it could almost work this way without the criminal element to it at all. That you see that she is obviously questioning what she's actually doing, how serious she wants to be with Nick in this relationship, and maybe that she feels she's things have gone too far. But of course, I thought this is very true to life. You have somebody who's very much wants to announce and maybe accelerate the direction of a relationship. So now he's making this grand party, inviting everybody. It's almost a way to, and I think she feels it, of forcing her into committing. And I think he feels that it's slipping away, basically, right?
Yeah, that's interesting insight. I hadn't really thought about any of this from Nick's perspective, but it does make sense. I have questions, I think, about their relationship and how it started. I mean, I know he and Coop were friends, so I
Yeah,
guess, and even maybe best friends, because it doesn't necessarily seem like the most intuitive match.
right. Yeah, I think that that's what's interesting about it. You can imagine that Coop. I mean, this is all inferred, like you mentioned. I think we'll have at some point, maybe when Mel starts to struggle with the relationship, there is a one-on-one conversation between
Yeah.
Nick and Coop that explains this.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah, my inference here as well. I can imagine because Coop was probably an athlete, they bonded over that. He moved to the neighborhood. He felt like, well, here's somebody where I can kind of have this different aspect of my personality. He's not as fixated all the time on just like the things they own, but has accomplished something. So maybe they had some kind of camaraderie there. He hangs around all the time. He was attracted to Mel, probably. Mel's neglected while Coop is following all these other interests he has. And eventually they started a relationship. But then maybe Mel did it to get Coop's attention. Maybe Mel did it as just some kind of release valve. And now all of a sudden Nick's like truly in love with her.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I made this bed. I have to kind of, lay in it. And now Nick's like, let's make some kind of commitment. As a matter of fact, in this episode, when she's like, when he says to her, I want you up here to when he's ready to give that speech, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to propose to her.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
she basically runs for the hills because she's probably maybe thinking the same thing.
Yeah, well, it doesn't help that she's dressed like a bride, more or less. But
Good point. Good point.
yeah, I think there could be. I mean, I think a lot of what you're saying is kind of apparent by the end of this episode.
Sure.
And I think there could also be, we haven't learned that much about the friendship between Coop and Nick, but sometimes if you really think highly of someone, then you think, well, if they've chosen that person for their partner, that person must be amazing because you think so highly of that person. They would only be with someone equally amazing, right? So maybe he kind of has her on a pedestal for that reason as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And she, she had her own life. She had this as a therapist and everything else. We may be seeing a version of her which isn't her at her most attractive either, right? So he, whatever, and this could be the reason that he is starting to maybe internalize this. Nick is that she's not the person she was when they were cheating on it. Well, that's how it is, right? It's very different when you're just hooking up with somebody and then when you're committed to a relationship with them, right? That dynamic has to change by definition.
Right. And don't forget, she didn't leave Coop because of the relationship with Nick, right? They got
Right.
caught.
Right.
So
They were still together. She was probably happy with
yeah,
having it or both ways. What a
right.
surprise.
It wasn't like she left Coop for Nick.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, of course, this culminates on the night of this party. Not only is Mel having all of these doubts, in the meantime, Coop is, while everybody's distracted by the party, Coop decides to attempt his first break in, professional break in, using the code that he needed, which was the code he needed to get into the door. That he had one code. But of course, what are these bags called again? These very
The
popular
Birkins,
Birkin bags,
yeah.
right? So the Birkin bags have their own alarm system and apparently not the same system. And
I mean, she had like $1 million worth of Birkins on that table.
but Lena seemed pretty confident that the one particular one would go unnoticed. I don't know. When you have them all displayed like that, I think you walk into the room, you're going to notice it's missing, to be honest. But I bet maybe she
Yeah, and that's what I
miscalculated.
thought about the watches too, right? Because each
True.
one had its own slot. So you're going to
True.
notice that there's an empty slot.
That's a good point. That's actually a very good point. So maybe they're both equally bad at this. But he doesn't even get the bag because he uses it to fend off the dog. That turns out they do have a dog. So once again, not everything went to plan. We start thinking like, oh, he finally has this whisper network of maids. They
Right.
know when people will be out. I know what the passcodes are. I know the bag she won't miss. Everything seems to be going pretty well. And it doesn't go well. Oh, and by the way, they don't have a dog. Oh, yes, they did. They got a new dog, and the maid was unaware of that as well, whoever was the informant in this particular case. And on top of all that, he gets chased by this dog. And of course, and he found this out at the golf course that they have called the cops. So the cops are waiting for another break-in and they all swarm. He's like literally almost captured in this particular episode. So all of this is, but speaking to his nearly sociopathic coolness, he immediately goes from this with a dog bite on his leg, by the way, to that party. But before
wait, let's talk about before we get there.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to jump yet. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, a bit of comedy in Escape from the House, where Elena gives the instructions, run east,
which way's east?
His reaction is the exact same as mine would be. Unless the sun is rising or setting, I cannot tell you which way east is at any given moment in time. It wasn't clear to me, is he in his own neighborhood still? Because why does he not know where he is, though? Like,
True.
that seemed kind of strange to me. I understand not knowing which way east is, but wouldn't you have enough familiarity with your own neighborhood to recognize your surroundings? And then what a stroke of luck for her to be pulling up just as he's exiting. I mean, that seems, improbable, but okay, let's go with it. But I like the way this whole scene was done. I felt it was very entertaining to watch, if improbable.
Yes, improbable in every way. Yes. And it also seems like this raises so many questions, and it seems like he is once again now potentially in ensnaring and potentially even what's the word I'm trying to think of, even that there may even be blowback for some of these people who are trying to assist them now, because all of a sudden now they know this house got broken into. They'll know someone knew the passcode. How did they know the passcode? Oh, I forgot to bring this up. Of course, he also loses an earpiece, which the camera follows onto the path. So someone's going to find that earpiece, and then how are they going to use that earpiece to track him? I mean, if it's it's black, so it doesn't look like it's an Apple AirPod. But if it was, you could literally find out who is the owner of that. So that whatever the vendor for this is, might lead back in some way to him or to someone close to him. So I
That's
do.
so funny. I thought it was white for some reason.
I
Interesting.
I could be wrong. I remembered it being a different, but I could be wrong about that as well. I mean,
But
if it's
don't you think he should start dressing like a jogger at least?
yes, yeah, yeah.
Right? Because people that like to run, and they'll do it at any hour. I think at least you would have a little bit of a built-in excuse because I thought, oh, maybe he could just say he's gone for a run, but then he was wearing jeans.
Yeah, if he's running in his, by the way, I thought the exact same thing. If he's jogging in his own neighborhood and they're like, "Who are you?" and they're like, "I live down the street," that would be a plausible escape plan.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is yeah, and he could just like if he had successfully stolen something, you put it in a bush, you
Yeah.
like jump
Right.
into a neighboring, you
Right.
run through the woods and you go into a neighboring neighborhood and you go for a jog. And if a cop shows up, you're like, oh my god, for really? I didn't know that. And
Yeah.
then like 2 hours later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you go and reclaim your stash from the
Exactly.
bush. Like this guy is not a good criminal.
Not cut out for this life.
No, none of these people are good criminals, by the way, at anything that they're doing here. But yes, this was all very funny, and also shows that I do like that. We have repeatedly talked about how he is not doing the right things as far as being a criminal, and proving it again. Like literally every episode, he almost gets caught.
Hmm.
Once again, it almost happened here. So I do. I think it speaks to that fact that he either needs to get much better at this, or he needs to change his tactics completely. Oh, but as going back to the point I was making about how he potentially is getting people in trouble who are these new facilitators, how did he know the passcode the to the to the house? If the alarm has been set, if they know that someone put the passcode in and unlocked the house and they can check their
Hmm.
records, they'll be like, someone knew the passcode to this house. Does that blow back on the maid? Does that blow back on the security guard? All of these things are potentially another potential clue, breadcrumb trail. That's gonna go back to either him or to someone that's already in this conspiracy. So this is all not. It doesn't look good for him. Is what I'm trying to say. If they seriously did an investigation of this crime, they would probably catch him pretty quickly.
I agree.
And I guess that's what we'll see coming up. Okay, Tori, this is a really good scene. And once again, these are the things
Hmm.
that I think work the best in the show. Tori obviously has this animosity towards her mom, feels like she messed up the relationship. She blames her mostly for this. And then the night of the party, she walks in on her mom and she sees the mom is like in a really bad state here. And I thought this was just so sweet that she is suddenly being the mother, helping her mom put her makeup on. And she's so tender to her. I thought this was a great scene.
I agree. And I think we learned a lot about her character, the daughter's
Yeah.
character in this episode that I really liked. Just as an aside, is this a milestone birthday or has he gone this over the top for like a run of the mill birthday?
You make a good point. I didn't even consider that because of my perspective of reading it as Nick is overcompensating for feeling like he is about to lose the
Yeah.
relationship. That because of that, I read it as he's just making a big show because it's like a way to entrap her in the relationship to some extent. But you could be correct. She could be turning 50, for example, and she's having some kind of
I mean, this
midlife
is
crisis.
to me, I understand these people are unfathomably wealthy, but this is bananas to me if this is not a milestone birthday.
I'm trying to think about their ages now. I didn't think about that. John Hamm is 54. I looked this up because in the show, he says he's 46. And
Right. In that first episode, right?
right.
Yeah.
And he's talking about like, I'm 46 in that
Yeah.
narration, that whole piece. And I'm like, John Hamm's more than 46. I looked him up, but I'm like, yeah, John Hamm at 54 looks like a 46-year-old
Yeah.
put together guy, which makes
Sure.
sense. I buy, yes, I buy that
Yeah.
fully. So you're not supposed to look that good at 54. True. And by the way, John Hamm, you look at him just like in just when he's just speaking at a podcast or something and hasn't put on makeup and whatever else, and has his hair is gray. By the way, it's not as dark as it is here. He doesn't look like this either. This, of course, is the idealized James Bondish
Hmm.
version of John Hamm that we see in this show. So he's playing younger, which is not surprising. So assuming that they met in college, I think he says, right? So she would be around the same age, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, let's give it a 5-year age gap even would be
Right,
41.
right.
So I guess he's just gone over the top for
Her
our
40,
41st. I
unless
don't know.
she's 40, maybe. But no, you know what? No, that's not true. She can't be 40 because when she gets a drink, when she's day drinking last week, the guy who's the
Yeah.
bartender, who's 41, by the way, and looks a lot older than John Hamm, just saying. And he jokes with her that I always thought I was
Right.
older than you, and she goes, "Oh, that's very sweet of you to say."
Yeah.
So
Right.
once again, especially if John Hamm met her in college, which I think is the case, that she would probably be approximately his same age, right? So yeah, so she's probably like
Okay.
in, so maybe she's 45, and this is like a big all out for 45.
Maybe.
Seems like a
Yeah.
little much. Once again, I think Amanda Peet is actually 50, but once again, she probably doesn't look that. I mean, she doesn't look that age at all. So she could pass for 45 easily.
Okay. Sorry. I digressed.
No, it's okay. No,
Yes.
I did. I had thought
The
about the math of their relationship as well.
Yeah, the scene is very sweet with her and her daughter. I don't understand some of the hairstyling and wardrobe decisions that were made,
Yes.
but nonetheless,
Is the only thing that wasn't eaten by moths, apparently.
maybe.
No, I'm sure this was all bought for the party. So I'm not sure. But yeah, that was it was a little odd, a little, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Like the design, her dress choice there was, it's not even, I mean, like you said, it looked like a wedding dress. It's not even contemporary looking. It's looking like like a throwback type thing.
Yeah, and then the hairstyle was a hairstyle a teenage girl would choose. It was not
Yes.
really great for her particular look, I didn't think.
The musical choices also when they're trying to dance to the music did not seem like the type of thing that it's not her music so
Hmm.
I'm not sure why they're picking that particular musical styling. Let's see. We talked about this. Oh, so that same night, saving the day once again, Allie gets up there and starts performing.
Right, and this links back to her therapy session,
Exactly.
right? Where we see her talking about how we're coming up on an anniversary. I don't think it's the first anniversary of a psychotic break that she
Right.
had, and how she feels like she's come really far because she heard there's what was supposed to be her wedding song in the car, and she made it through the whole song. And that being the same song she decides to sing at the party.
What was the song she was performing now? I'm trying to
Hold
remember.
Me Now by the
Hold Me
Thompson
Now, of
Twins.
course. Yes, Hold Me Now.
Hmm.
Yes.
Really
Uh,
pretty rendition of it too that she does.
yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so she's gotten a regular job, by the way, at that bar. So that's been a little bit of a success for her, but she can't really appreciate it. But yeah, once again, interesting that she is supposedly emotionally unstable and she's there giving emotional support to everyone around her. Maybe that speaks to her, the part of her breaking point was in being the emotional anchor to what could have been, what must have been an absolutely horrible home life when she was growing up.
Oh my
There's no
gosh.
way that anyone
Yes.
lived with that mother for a
Yes.
whole lifetime and wasn't driven insane.
Absolutely agree.
So yeah, very curious to see how she develops. I really like the Allie character, by the way. I really like her a lot in the show.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, maybe her meds are just excellent because for somebody who is supposed to be in this level of mental distress, she seems very well adjusted.
Yeah, I don't have an experience with being that close to someone who, but we don't even know what her diagnosis is because
Right.
it's if she is manic depressive, maybe that's the case. We haven't seen her be manic, although we have hints of it when she like buys every cereal in the supermarket. So there's
Right,
little
right.
touches of it here potentially. And by the way, that would make sense that maybe her and Coop both have that because Coop is potentially in a manic episode himself, considering what he's currently doing, and completely unrealistically believing that he's going to get away with this, or maybe not wanting to. Who knows? But yeah, so that is intriguing. But yeah, I honestly don't know if this is in any way a realistic representation of this type of mental episode. Or once again, I don't even know what her diagnosis is, so I can't
Right.
really speak to it. And then Mel, as the episode gets close to the end, we see that Mel is on the trampoline. She's remembering a simpler time. Of course, this is a theme of the show that maybe we all get caught up on these climbing the corporate ladder or just individually owning things and having these amenities around us, and we kind of miss the forest for the trees. This is all pretty heavy-handed, to be honest, but it is kind of cute or sweet to see her remembering these simpler times with the kids. And of course, Coop
And
shows
with
up.
Coop, not just the kids.
Yes, and Coop too. Yeah, and then Coop it shows up, and she has this very honest, maybe for the first time ever, this honest conversation with him. And I did like seeing this again. That despite the animosity he has about her cheating on him, that he is asking her how she's doing. He is concerned for her well being.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we can back up
Sure.
for just a couple of minutes, I also like the scene with Coop and his daughter,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Where she kind of snaps
Accuses
at
him.
him,
Yep.
right?
For
And
abandoning the marriage.
yes, and says, "Why didn't you fight for
Right.
us?"
Right.
And it seems like it's dawning on him for the first time that
Yes.
that could have been an
Yeah.
option,
Right.
right? That he kind of thought once he found her in this other relationship, it was done and there was nothing to fight for.
Right.
It was already gone. So it seemed like an interesting realization to me that it felt like he hadn't considered that that was an option. And I like the insight into the daughter's life where he's saying, "Can't you cut me some slack?" And she's saying, "All I do is cut you slack."
Right.
And whether that is objectively true or not, I think she definitely feels that way. And, and she has felt for a long time, probably, from before the divorce, that she's been cutting him slack. I always go back to, yes, but you were cutting him slack while you were enjoying that beautiful house and your private tennis lessons and whatever it may
Right.
be.
Of course.
But, for a teenage girl, that's what it feels like. She didn't have the attention of her parent that she needed, right? So I liked all of that. And I think that's partly what drives him to go after her and talk with her in the way that he did.
Right.
So I liked all of that leading up to it. And then, her reaction to him saying, "How are you?" Of, "You've never asked me that until now,"
Right.
gives you some insight into what was going on beforehand.
Yeah. I think we need to understand that. But I think that is, again, a strength of the show that we are now seeing that in that first episode, I described that first episode of the show as a lot of fun, but on its surface, you
So
can read it
fun.
as being purely misogynistic. That is just like, these women are making my life so hard. This young girl I sleep with screwed up my job. And, you could read it that way. And I think the show intentionally is setting up our expectations that way and then now subverting them. And this is a perfect example of where you see that, where his wife feels like he abandoned the marriage and then was maybe just trying to get his attention with the affair, and he didn't notice, so she continued the affair. And then the daughter feels like he neglected her emotionally. And then even last week when he frustratedly is saying, "What do you want from me? You want more money, you want more money," when maybe it was never about money. Like, he was obsessed with
Well,
the
it's
right,
never about money when you have money.
when you have money. Exactly, true. But I'm just making the point that the fact that he gets frustrated with this feeling that, oh, they want more money from me, they want more money from me. But at the same time, to some extent, I'm sure he has trained them when he is not present, and then he buys tennis coaching lessons, and he buys a bigger house, and he buys a more lavish car and a more lavish or prestigious prep school you go to.
Well,
He has trained them to expect that he will buy their affection to some extent. So now he's kind of reaping what he's sowing. He's trying to change the rules in a way, but yes, of
well,
course,
I
when you have
mean,
everything, you can be picky.
yeah, and maybe this is a little bit of a forced analogy, but in a way, like it's the two different love languages, right? That
Right,
you do
right.
know that idea of love languages?
In general, yeah.
Are you familiar that so some people's love language is acts of service. They see
Right,
that you need help with something and they help you
right,
without you having to ask for it. Some people's love language is physical affection.
right.
Some people's love language is gifts,
Gifts.
right?
Right.
And I think, the idea is that the disconnect is when two people have different love languages, you're showing love in your love language, but they're looking for it in their love language, right? So,
Right.
and that's where the disconnect causes stress because that's wonderful that you bought me all of these amazing, valuable gifts, but that's not what means anything to me. What
Right.
means something is you showing up on time for my tennis match,
Right.
right?
And
So I think there's that. I also think it's interesting that in this episode, they made the point of him saying, I can't remember who the conversation was with, probably Elena, that he never cheated on his wife.
right. Yes, that was with Elena.
Right. So in his head, he was doing all the right things.
Right.
Whether he
Yes.
was correct about that or not is different.
Yeah.
But in his head, he was being a good father and a good husband. And he's so confused as to how this all happened.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to circle back to in exactly that way. I wasn't really thinking about the love language thing, but I was going to mention that I think that the show has to get to that, and it is going to work its way to that. That Coop is going to have some revelation in the upcoming episodes where he suddenly looks back on himself and sees his own flaws here, and also what drove him to, let's say he became really, really fixated on his work. And like you said, he felt like I'm the rule follower. I'm doing everything correctly. And maybe he was the sibling between him and Allie that was the one who followed all the rules and did everything, dotted all his I's and crossed all his T's. And why is this all happening to me now? And he needs to look at his complicity in all of this.
Yeah, I think a lot also in this scene reminded me of this idea that actually kind of comes up not kind of, definitely comes up in Mad Men as
Mhm.
well. And very much is an idea in feminist literature from the 60s and 70s. But to me, I feel like it's a bigger commentary about these people and it's been said as much like in the last episode. I promise I'm going someplace here. In the last episode where they talk about you don't know what to do with yourself. So you take up these hobbies and all of a
Right,
sudden you're
right,
driving an industry of cigars and smoked meats and whatever it may be.
right, right.
There's this idea that I learned about first in feminist literature and the Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, which is like considered a classic of feminist literature, of these housewives in the 60s that had everything they were supposed to have. They had these perfect lives, and then they still weren't happy.
Right.
And they didn't know what to do with themselves, and they were so frustrated, but they couldn't put their finger on what was wrong. So then they started self-medicating, right? Because
Right.
that's what you did when women weren't happy at that time. And you see that in Mad Men as well, right? With
Right.
Betty going to the therapist, and then the therapist is calling the husband and saying everything they talked about.
Right.
And then that's how women came to rely on Valium or maybe just several glasses of wine to get through the day because they have this dissatisfaction and lack of fulfillment in their lives and they can't put their finger on why or how to fix it because the checklist has all been checked off, right? So why am I not perfectly, thrillingly happy when I achieved all of these goals? And I think that's a lot of what this show is about. And I think that's what we're seeing with both of them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that is something that's probably happened culturally over time that, men, and probably always did, but weren't allowed to express that, are feeling some of those same anxieties
Right.
that people felt back then that women did specifically in some of those analogies. And like you said, Mad Men, excellent example of that, or like Revolutionary Road and similar literary and cultural references, even movies back from the 1950s and 60s that addressed this even back then. But basically saying, am I allowed to say that I'm unhappy when I have everything, right? Like the
Right.
guilt of having what you thought you wanted, of getting what you wanted and still being unhappy, like and feeling guilty about that. And I think that's exactly what a lot of people are feeling and maybe always feel when you get past this midlife and you supposedly achieve what you were supposed to achieve and then you're like, but I'm still not happy, right? And then
Right. It's
that
like the
revelation.
stereotypical midlife crisis
Exactly.
idea.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, exactly. And and I think that that's exactly what's being illustrated here, just at a much higher socioeconomic latter point, but I think it's something that everybody deals with. They, in this particular case, it's even more intriguing because of the fact that they, on paper, do could have all those opportunities, could have all
Exactly.
those luxuries, could retire and live out all these fantasies, and don't. They're on the same hedonic treadmill that everybody else is because there's just this expectation that they've defined and these rules they've set up that they're going to spend so much and they're going to do so much and they have so many more titles they need to achieve or a certain office position that they want. Like they want to be on a higher floor and have a better view from their window. And all those rules are in place. And they're still like, no matter how high up that building I climb, I'm still not happy with my role.
Right.
And that once again, that is like the midlife crisis, right? Of saying like, I followed all the rules. And it's what he says here. I followed all the rules. I supported my wife. I earned a lot of money. I had a prestigious job. I moved into the best neighborhood. I put the kids in the best school. I was faithful to my wife, and my marriage fell apart, and all that went out the window. And of course, now he's lost that job as well, which is where he really is at that point. So, I mean, thematically, that's everything that's happening in the show for sure. And yeah, and he's the Betty Draper in this particular show. He's both. He's
He's both. Yeah.
he's both at the same time. But it is interesting. Let's just go one more minute on the trampoline with them. It is
Oh, no,
interesting.
absolutely. There's more to say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did find it really interesting, this idea that they've been talking past each other and now they finally are having the same conversation finally. And they both have regrets. Like they're basically, and part of that was the conversation he had with Lori, with her saying that you weren't present, you didn't fight for the marriage. And she probably means that not only after you found out about the affair, but even before, of course, you weren't fighting for the marriage. And yeah, so I think that he's making that revelation. And of course, she probably made this revelation much earlier on. It now finds herself in yet another trap of her own making in now being in this affair and then wanting to, having this affair discovered. And I think about the situation where she suddenly is, this that the a relationship with Nick has been discovered, and Nick actually really does love her. So now it's again, she got something that she supposedly wanted, and she feels like, but I really didn't want it, right? And she again feels this guilt that she made a mistake in, or that she is unsatisfied again with what she supposedly chose.
Well, I think even beyond that, I think to me, she's realizing in this conversation that she had been blaming Coop
Right. Mm-hmm.
for so much of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
but now she's acknowledging there's a dissatisfaction within herself
Right.
that isn't being caused by some external force that she can extricate herself from. And this goes back to the anger that's vibrating in her. That is the
Right.
reason she keys the car, right? That she has this thing and she had assumed that it was because of something external, that because the marriage wasn't good, that's why she was having these feelings. But now the marriage is gone. She's in this supposedly amazing relationship with this amazing man who clearly has her on a pedestal. He says he's throwing this party so that he can show her
Right.
how amazing she is. And she is still not happy.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and I think a lot of us can empathize with that, right? You get what you wanted and you're still unhappy. But I think you make a really good point too, that there is this internal vacuum or lack that she can't solve. And she blamed other people. And then
Mm-hmm.
supposedly, the marriage is done. She still gets all the amenities of that marriage. She's with this a person that everybody envies her. I can't believe you're with him.
Mm-hmm.
You must be so happy. And of course she's like, but I'm not. And then now she has to finally have that conversation with herself. And I mean, it's the exact same conversation that Coop is having with himself. So it's interesting that again, these mostly female characters, going back to my original point, are reflecting things that are happening in him. So it's making things It's an interesting mirror image as the show progresses of that first episode, where it's like all these things are being imposed onto him, and then he like has a conversation with each one of those characters, and it's like, oh, this is happening to you too. It's like growing up all over the
Hmm.
course of, like
Hmm.
the parent, like, or I should say the child having to suddenly be like it's that moment where you grow up and then you realize that your parents are people too. And it's like
Yeah.
he has to extend his empathy to these women in his life, and to all these people. I mean, Bernie also is another mirror image of his experience. Barney, I keep saying Barney.
Yeah, I really liked that she got to this introspective point of seeing that in herself and also sharing with Coop that, yeah, the marriage wasn't perfect. There were problems, but that wasn't actually what was driving all of this, or at least it wasn't as essential as she had made it out to be.
Speaking of the women in his life, earlier on, after the dog attack, he is
Yes.
being nursed by Elena at
Yeah,
his
by the
house.
way, Uber Eats ad and a DoorDash ad in this episode. Did you notice?
Yeah, I wonder how. I wonder how many. I mean, I wonder if they get paid for all these things. They probably do. Actually,
They
Apple's
must.
probably making money. That's one way Apple's making money off these shows, and of course by putting Apple devices all over the place. You know what though? Now that I'm thinking about it, I thought that earbud was black. There's no way they're not. Well, I mean, but he's a criminal. There supposedly was an unwritten rule that Apple had to have all devices in their movies and shows have to be
Yes,
Apple
we talked
devices,
about this before.
but
Yeah.
not the bad guys. Villains are not supposed to
Well, I
use.
told you that part.
Oh yeah, I guess you know what, I did my research after that conversation, probably prompted by you. That yeah, I did read that same thing, but then supposedly Apple has denied it. But then people have like cross referenced and been like, well, in this movie, all the good guys have iPhones and the bad guy has an Android, right? So it is kind of maybe an unofficial rule. Maybe everybody just thinks it's a rule, so they make their shows accordingly.
Yes,
I'm not
gone
sure,
with it. Yes.
but yeah. So I mean, Coop is the star of the show. So is he a good guy or a bad guy? I guess it remains to be seen. Oh, but anyway, so he's the dog attack. Elena's nursing him back to health, and this is when Sam sends him a nude. So now
Hmm.
Elena knows that Sam and him are together.
And this was another funny interaction, right, with
Yes.
Elena of like, what is going on around here?
Yes, exactly. And of course Sam just had this really ugly interaction with her husband. And I mentioned this earlier as well. This is kind of another road not taken with Coop, that Sam and her husband are having this really ugly breakup. Once again, this guy is a real jerk though, right? Like
Yes.
not in this particular case. He seems like he's trying to just, can't we just talk? Can't we just have a
Yeah.
regular conversation? But you have to have this in the context of the absolutely repellent things he was saying last week, right? So
Yeah.
there is, we have to remember that. But yeah, what did you think about, the Sam and how she's being used at this point in the show? And also this revelation, Elena reacting to this, and why they are even bringing Elena into like this. She's becoming this like buddy confidant for him, which is
Yeah.
also another thing that I found kind of weird in the show. This is another reason I was kind of bumping up against aspects of this show. She is becoming this kind of like, hey, I'm your buddy. We can talk about these crimes we're committing, sure. But then Allie's kind of like his confidant too.
Right.
And then Bernie's kind of his confidant too. I'm like, what is going on? And it seems a little fuzzy for me right now.
It is fuzzy. It might be closer to what real life can be,
Sure,
though,
yes.
right?
Mhm.
As far as story construction, it is
Right.
unusual
Yes,
to
right.
have so many people that you have shared private things with.
Right.
But it might be more like, I mean, it's not that unrealistic to me, actually,
Right.
except for the female male ratio is a little strange.
Right.
But I did like the way Sam reacted to the girlfriend being at the party. I liked the idea of, I think they're carting your girlfriend over there. You better go. I thought she, clearly there's a lot of hostility that she has towards him, but I found it entertaining to watch. And as I said, I love the scene where Elena sees the text. So all of that
Yes.
I
Yeah.
thought was entertaining, if nothing else.
Yeah. I go back to this idea that I am enjoying all of this and even
Yes,
adding elements to the show. I'm enjoying all of it. And, the show could have been a much simpler version of itself where it's really just him working through these emotional things with his sister and then planning the next job and pulling it off and, maybe slowly escalating the crimes he's committing and getting more bold and people are closing in. That could have been a version of the show. This show has become much messier, but has a lot of. I enjoy all the elements in
I
it.
agree.
I'm just confused as I'm watching this show. Like once again, purely, you're absolutely correct. You can have different confidants about different aspects of your life. This is the person you talk to about your work stuff. This is the stuff you talk to about your marriage. This is the stuff you talk to about your family issues. Right? That's actually more realistic. It's just not what you're used to seeing in a show where it's like
Absolutely.
we
Yeah,
have four different confidants per episode. It's just like
absolutely.
it's you got to streamline this a little bit, And so
And
I'm more confused about the shape of the show than I am about any of these particular character dynamics.
yeah, I think that's fair. And I also thought, wow, Sam gets over stuff fast. She's pretty forgiving considering,
Yes,
she just saw that girl kissing him in a way that made her uh, accurately conclude that they had slept together. So,
yes,
I mean, not right then, but in life they had slept together. So, I that ex-husband must have really put that affair in her face for her to not be able to forgive him.
yes. A couple of points on the hookup here at the end. So, of course, she ends up in the car with him at the end, which is very cute. Where he just that's very realistic
Mhm.
too. He just gets in the car and he's like, "Oh, hey, here's something I
Yeah,
wasn't
that
expecting tonight."
makes no sense. How long has she been there?
Yeah, how long did she wait? Good point. Maybe she did wait until he was like kind of like she
Just
saw him outside of the house. He wasn't just sitting in there
she's
for
been
an
doing
hour.
a crossword on her phone for 45 minutes.
She had that her wordle yet for the day. So, but yeah, so that was funny. But it was cute the way it just kind of like, oh hey, hello. That was fun. Although I gotta tell you, this is the way my brain works. I'm like, I would not be hooking up that night because I don't want her seeing the bite mark on my leg when
Mm,
someone's going to be like, "Oh well, my dog almost caught him," and she's like, "That's weird." Coop had a bite mark on his leg from
yeah,
the
fair
dog.
point.
So yeah, that's what I would have been thinking about. Like, I really have. I'm so hungover tonight. I don't know if I can. I might just have to go home and get some rest. So maybe I'll just keep it bandaged up the whole time. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. What did he say happened? Somebody did ask him why he was limping.
His wife does, and what does he? Oh no, he changes it. She says, "What happened to your leg when she's bouncing on the trampoline?" And then he asks her a question back, which I forget what it was,
I
but
see.
he just changes the topic basically. So,
Okay.
but it's also the wife, so I mean, he could just say, "Oh, I twisted my ankle playing tennis." Like that's fine.
Yeah,
It's different when you are going to get undressed in front of somebody.
absolutely. Yeah.
A little more complicated. A little more stories got to come up with. Do we want to talk? Let's talk about a minute with on that whole situation where Nick wants to make the speech, and we'll go back a little bit to that before we get to the very final moments. But Nick wants to make that speech, brings her up on stage. Mel's obviously very uncomfortable with this. I was waiting to see what she was going to say. She just says nothing at all. Uh, and then, of course, Ali swoops in and saves the day by covering that song, which I never really paid attention to the lyrics of that song, but seems
Same.
a little dark in the context of what's happening in this
Yeah.
particular moment, and also a little dark for that to be their wedding song. By the way, if though given the fact that the way the song starts off lyrically,
I
but
agree with you. People do choose strange songs as their wedding
true.
songs sometimes. So it's not completely unprecedented for people to choose songs that when you listen to the words make no sense as wedding songs. But yes, fair point.
And where do you think? What do you think? We touched on it briefly, but how do you feel? What do you think Nick is thinking at this moment? I feel like he's got to start thinking about potentially ending this relationship with her. How do you read this?
I mean, this was so awkward and
Right,
cringeworthy. It was really bad. So, especially after he has said such amazing, glowing things about her,
right.
for her to not even be able to force out Thanks everyone so much for
Just a
coming.
thank you. Yeah,
It
exactly.
means so much to be here with you all. Thank you for throwing me this beautiful party. Like that's all
Yeah.
you had to do.
Yeah, I felt like that is such, for me personally, if I'm in that situation, it's not something you can come back from, right? Like the fact that she is so uncomfortable, and like you said,
Hmm.
could just say thank you. I'm so
Yeah.
terrible at these type of things. I can't, I'm not prepared to say anything. Whatever. Just thanks for coming out. Thank you, Nick, for this party. Just the politeness of it, and then afterwards he could be like, well, she's embarrassed and talking in front of people, and you could, but I mean, this was a complete fiasco.
No, absolutely awful.
Yeah. And yeah, so I'm very curious to see how Nick reads this. And I think I have to assume he's going to have a conversation with her soon about whether they should proceed or not, or whether she wants to proceed with
Yeah.
this relationship or not. Hey, everybody, this is Victor interjecting here from the editing bay. This conversation went so much longer than I expected. This is what happens when we record on the weekend and we don't have any other plans. But I did think it was a very interesting conversation. I did want to mention the fact that the place I wanted to land this conversation on was the scene, of course, when Mel unwraps Coop's present to her, which of course turns out to be in a plain brown paper bag, some red hot candies, which in a show that is winkingly aware of its metaphors, is presenting us with a whole bunch of metaphors here. Here is this thing that supposedly has no value compared to these extremely expensive gifts that she peruses, but then decides to go with this one instead. And it tells us that Coop knows her so well. It reminds her of what they had, something that she flashes back to when she remembers them all bouncing on the trampoline. And of course, the pain of that nostalgia, right? Nostalgia means a pain of a memory. And this red hot candy makes her tear up. It's the candy and the memory, of course, simultaneously. And it's their relationship, their marriage, all of that bundled up in here. And this is very on the nose, but it is pretty sweet. And it worked for me, honestly. And did text Sona as I was editing and remembering that I had forgotten to bring this up. And she has pretty much the same interpretation. So did want to throw that in there, considering I do think it's pretty important to this particular episode. All right, let's hear the last few minutes of my conversation with Sona. So that pretty much covers the episode. What did you, or I should say, what do you anticipate? Apple does not give us scenes for next week.
I
So
know.
what do you think? I have to say, as I've outlined multiple times here, I really don't know what the shape of what the rest of this season will be. And in some ways, I like that because I don't know what's to come. Oftentimes, I can predict pretty much. Well, I know exactly what's going to happen. I don't know. I know what the mystery we're trying to solve by the end of the episode is, or what the cliffhanger is going to be, the thing we need to resolve. It usually is funneling down, and maybe the show is still, we're only 4 episodes in, so maybe we haven't started funneling down. But I don't know. I can't imagine what next week will bring. Do you have any guesses?
I don't have guesses because, as we kind of started discussing at the beginning of this, there's been such a shift in the last episode of what this show had been and what I
Yes.
thought it was going for. And for me, in a good way, I love a midlife crisis. I want to know
Yes.
more about the midlife crisis and how it plays out for Coop and Mel and everybody else around them as well. So I'm interested in that. I am not sure where that is going to fit with this plot of him breaking into houses and stealing things and possibly this idea that we've talked about blackmail. It feels very crowded for, did you say we're at the midpoint or after next week we'll be at the
Next week will be
midpoint?
midpoint.
So it feels very crowded for 6 episodes to get into all of that. But maybe they were confident they were going to get a second season. So there's not so much drive to resolve things in a
Yeah.
way that it could be left as is if they didn't get a second season. Maybe things will be more open ended, and that gives a little more breathing room. What are you thinking?
I worry about that. I don't like a show that doesn't have some kind of closure at the end of season one, and I think that that's been like a kiss of death for so many of these prestige shows that seem to I assume a season two. I do like the fact that they have, and Apple has not given season twos to all of their shows. I do like the fact that Apple was so confident about it. I personally think that the show is probably, and this is where they're planting so many flags now, the show is probably going to start taking shape for whatever it's going to be probably next week. And maybe it's just the curse of this is a 10 episode season of show. Maybe the first season should have been a little shorter, and then we could have had a little,
Mhm.
more. It would have been more streamlined. So maybe they needed to make it shaggy to let it, get to that size. But it is like, going back to the things that work in the show. I mentioned this before. This show is like Fleischman is in trouble if Fleischman was stealing from
Yes.
his wife's co-workers' houses. So it is a weird, and so it's as strange as that sounds, where there is a
Yeah.
tug of war between like, is this a crime thriller, or is this a story about this upper middle class family and their ennui, whether that, like
Right.
Fleischman is in trouble, or a Mad Men, for example. Uh, and Mad Men, by the way, I felt Mad Men always struggled with this as well, because we had this huge mystery that had been planted in episode one and this huge driver of plot. And honestly, for 90% of Mad Men, sometimes for full seasons at a shot, that show had no interest in that foundational mystery as well. So
Fair point.
that was so that is part of the tug of war I think the show is struggling with. But yeah, I think we're probably going to see shape to it. Other than that, I don't know. And the things that I could speculate on, I worry are not great, right? Like, introducing all these characters and Elena's brother being a screw up, and maybe him, derailing what is starts being pretty streamlined. One question I do have for you directly as to the direction of the show is, do you think we're going to see the episode one, the first moments of episode one, the death at the bottom of those stairs and his escape from that? Do you think we see that next week?
Oh my gosh, it never occurred to me that we would see it next week.
And here's the reason I ask. Not because this is once again speaks to the shape of the show being a little confusing to me, not because I feel like, well, that is imminent. It's because that thing happens and then we jump back 4 weeks, and
Mm,
and we think about like how much time has passed. This is 4 weeks.
mhm, mhm,
I mean, he's
mhm.
pulled off a few of these heists. We had a montage this week, which must have taken days. It couldn't have happened all in one day. And we have to be at least 3 weeks into the timeline of the show, no?
Good point. Good point.
So I think we are coming up on, and speaking of the fact that I think the show is going to decide what kind of show it is and change direction, that would definitely put the show on a very direct trajectory towards some type of conclusion, right? Covering up a murder and getting away with it would change the type of show this is,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. I had thought of that more as a penultimate episode or final episode of the season, but you're making a really good point about the timeline.
it's just a timeline. If they had not told us that time, the amount of time, I would
Mhm.
be like, that could be the penultimate episode.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, it could have shocked us in the middle of the season with it happening. But like I said, I mean, there's no way this has happened in 2 weeks.
Right.
Impossible, right? I mean, literally, if we just count the days, there's no way that we've seen that few days. So we have to be close to that 1 month mark.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I guess that all remains to be seen. Um, so yeah, I think that's the episode, and we'll all know much more about that. By the way, of course, this will be publishing on Sunday, hopefully Sunday, if not Monday morning. And but we will be covering. We'll be back on our regular schedule. I'm back at work and back at home, and vacation is over. So we will try to publish the next episode, friends and family, your friends and family recap episode on Friday, like we
Your
normally
friends
would.
and neighbors.
Friends,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I keep saying that. Your friends and neighbors. The next episode 5 recap should be available on Friday or Saturday, our usual time slot. And later this week, we'll be discussing Mobland. We have two episodes of Mobland to discuss this week. And now we'll also be doing a May preview. I did a preview episode for things you might want to watch in April, and that episode did pretty well. So I will probably
Nice.
include in that Mobland discussion, I will include roundup of things you may want to watch this month. Sona, are you interested in watching Another Simple Plan, which is premiering on May 1st?
I enjoyed the first one enough that I would watch the second, but not enough to be excited about it.
The reviews have been mostly positive,
Yeah.
and but not extremely enthusiastically, which I feel like was the reaction to the first
Right.
film. Which is funny. I did enjoy that first film, and yet I remember nothing about it. So I might need to watch a YouTube recap if I plan to watch that.
Yeah, because I could have sworn one of them died at the end, but apparently not. I don't know.
I have to remember that. I think there was a twin in there somewhere, so maybe the
Oh,
twin died.
really?
I can't remember. I can't remember.
Okay.
I'm more curious to see what the reaction is going to be because of this whole, Blake Lively backlash that may be going on right now. And
Yes.
so curious more to see like what the general reaction is to it than the film itself. And unfortunately, that if there's some negative blowback, that Anna Kendrick, someone who I very much like,
She's great.
is maybe caught up in the crossfires.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the things I'll be discussing briefly in what we can watch this upcoming month. A lot of one thing that's coming back this month that we may be covering week to week. It's a big question mark on this one. Is Your Friends in the? I mean, is Nine Perfect Strangers season 2?
I
After
know.
was it
Can you
4 years,
believe
three
that?
three and a half
Yeah.
years later? So, which I think partially was delayed by the writer's strike. So once again, it could be that this may have come out in like 2.5 years, which still would have been a pretty big gap for that type of show. But now it's like nearly 4 years later that we're seeing this show. It's like Severance, but I don't think as many people watch that show as watch Severance. That's for sure. But Nicole Kidman apparently can get anything greenlit.
There you go. Oh my gosh, yes, because there's going to be another season of The Perfect Couple. Did you see that?
Oh my God. No, I did not see that. Holy cow.
Yes.
Oh God. She has like 20 things going on. If they do another Big Little Lies, she'll be in that, I'm sure, as well. All right. So, yes, we'll be back on Friday. Earlier than that, of course, we'll be discussing Mobland. We'll be discussing Andor. Is Joel watching Andor? Has he started?
I know he's planning to. I don't think he has yet.
They're dropping 3 episodes per week. This is
Wow.
like, yeah, it's like 2.5 hours of, it's basically a whole Star Wars movie every week for 4 weeks. So a lot to cover here, but we will try to cover it here on the podcast for the next month or so. And of course, that May preview episode as well, all packed in there somehow.
Right.
But most importantly, our coverage of episode 5 of this show on Friday. All right, Sona, as usual, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. I talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.